Morning, everybody, and welcome to Welcome. And we've got something a bit different today. We're going to be doing some peer-reviewed poetry. So the purpose of this is that we've got a selection of poems that are written by scientists, and we've got professional scientists, and professional scientists, and we've got a selection of poems that are okay about science written by poets.
Professional, proper poets.
Amateur poets. So allow me first of all to introduce the gentleman to my left. It is, of course, Mr. Dan Simpson, MA. Oh yes, in English literature.
I'm sorry.
That's his Twitter handle. So throughout the entire next 40 minutes or so, please do use the hashtag #SpotOnPoetry. You can live peer review us as we're going. If you see us checking our phones, it's because we're looking at what you're telling us, not because we're ignoring the other person.
Well, I might do that as well, actually, Sam, let's be honest. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Sam Illingworth, who will be presenting the scientific point of view this morning as well.
Thank you very much. So, basically, I have a hypothesis.
What is your hypothesis, Sam?
My hypothesis, and I'm going to write it on here, my hypothesis is that science presents the best worldview of everything.
Of everything,
Of everything. This is my hypothesis that I'm going to be trying to prove over the next 40 minutes or so.
All right, well, as I'm a poet, I don't have a hypothesis, I have a prelude. And my prelude is going to be that science has destroyed our natural appreciation of the world by shining the cold light of rationalism, of mathematics, of evidence onto it. And it stops us appreciating the world, the universe, in this romantic, sensual, immediate kind of way. What are you writing, Sam?
Well, some poetic waffle. That's
some poetic waffle. Okay.
So basically, we'll just
right.
we'll just say we can either accept my hypothesis, in which I'm right, or reject it, in which case Dan's right. But what we also have is, because this is a conference on peer review, we're going to be asking you to peer review the selection of poems that we have. So you can see the paddles that we have. On one side you have accept, on the other you have reject. On one side you have minor revisions, on the other you have major revisions. And I'm going to construct a diagram here. So this is accept, this is minor revisions, this is major revisions, and this is reject. And what we're asking is whether or not the poem that we're reading presents a good worldview. And then I'm going to colour, it gets very complicated. I'm going to colour code them according to whether or not they're written by scientists or by poets. And then if I'm correct, all of the scientists' poems will be up here and all of the poets' attempts will be down
it's
here.
It's going to be the other way around, Sam,
so
actually.
we need to calibrate this first
yes,
of all. So just look around the room. I'm going to leave this as a fairly open question. Do you accept or reject this room? That's it. That's
Sam,
the question.
Are you playing Tinder with the audience?
We're playing Tinder with the audience.
Okay,
so
good.
not just their physical appearance, because that might be down here. But if just look around the room, do we accept or reject this room?
Obviously. Look at this.
Oh wow, this is very harsh.
There's a couple of major revisions being held up as well. Okay, good.
So mainly accept, which is okay. So that would mean, and everybody in the room, scientists. Mainly scientists in the room.
Any poets in the room stumbled in thinking they're going to the textile conference next door?
Okay.
Okay. So it's going to be hard work for me today, Sam, I can tell.
So here we have the spot on crowd. So
acceptable,
I'm
nice.
just going to have blue. I don't know if I'm writing the word blue because it's obvious that it's blue. Is scientists.
Yeah. What colour are you going to give the poets?
Would you like
sparkly pink?
Would you like red?
Red will do.
Okay.
By the way, you are absolutely welcome to peer review us live as we go. Do use the hashtag #SpotOnPoetry. Do tweet at us. We'll be checking that as we go and reading out any of those comments. They're interesting. Okay, so we've started our experiment this morning to peer review some poetry. I will start since I have the floor. So, as I said, science destroys our natural appreciation of the world. And we've seen this through poetry throughout time. Keats very famously said, and Dawkins stole, that science unweaves the rainbow. I think stealing, that's absolutely stealing.
It's called citations.
It's called plagiarism. It's called plagiarism in poetry, Sam. And of course, Edgar Allan Poe in his sonnet to science said we are also taking away our appreciation of the beauty science is making everything rational. I actually want to talk about Walt Whitman's poem, When I Heard the Learned Astronomer. This is a very famous poem, mainly because it was used in Breaking Bad. Poetry is cool, you guys. This is Walt Whitman's When I Heard the Learned Astronomer, and it addresses this issue of science taking away our romantic appreciation. When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I, sitting, heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon unaccountable I became tired and sick, till, rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself in the mystical, moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. Science is boring, Sam. That's what he's basically saying.
Right, okay,
it's dull. It's all figures and maths and numbers and let's look at the stars, you know?
Okay, so how do we feel about that poem? The worldview that poem represents. Do we accept that worldview? Do we reject it? Do we think it has minor revisions or major revisions? Hold up your paddles to vote now.
It's not gone well.
It's not
There's a few accepts. I'm really pleased with the 5 people who accepted Walt Whitman's worldview there.
That is mainly major revisions and reject, though. So I'm going to put it down here. So Walt Whitman, one of the preeminent American poets, you have decided his work is not quite good enough. So we're going to be putting him down here.
Disappointing.
Walt Whitman. And I think, does that poem appear anywhere else in popular culture?
Yes, that's the Breaking Bad poem made famous by Walter White as, you know.
So,
brilliant.
Okay. So what you're telling me with that is that it's good because it mentions drugs. But we all know, and this is obviously in no way condoning that drugs wouldn't exist without scientists. And I'm going to read you a poem by a famous chemist, a famous Cornishman, prior president of the Royal Society, Sir Humphrey Davy, who, as well as being a preeminent chemist, inventor of the mining lamp, also spent a lot of time with the Lake poets, such as Samuel Taylor Coleridge, getting absolutely off his face on nitrous oxide. And this is a poem that he wrote about that. He almost killed his wife when doing that. This is a poem that he wrote about his experiences on nitrous oxide. Not in the ideal dreams of wild desire have I beheld a rapture-wakening form. My bosom burns with no unhallowed fire, yet is my cheek with rosy blushes warm. Yet are my eyes with sparkling lustre filled, yet is my mouth replete with murmuring sound. Yet are my limbs with inward transport filled, and clad with newborn mightiness around. So I'm not asking you to literally imagine what it would be like to be drunk on nitrous oxide, but what he's describing there, do we think that represents a good worldview, a poor worldview? Are we accepting, rejecting minor revisions or major revisions? Please hold up your paddles now. Oh, quite. That's more minor revisions, would you say, on average?
What you'll notice, Sam, there are less accepts than that poem of the Walt Whitman.
Okay, well, this is good.
Which I'm very pleased about. That's brilliant.
Well,
That'll do.
So I'm going to have him. I've lost my bleed. Yeah, I'm going to put him more here-ish. Okay. So this is Davy. Humphrey.
Okay, so scientists can obviously use poetry to describe science. I get that, that's fine. But poets do this too. Poets do this as well. This is an incredible poem by Robert Kelly, literally called Science. You know, poets are nothing if not ambitious, trying to encompass all of science in one poem. It goes like this. Science explains nothing, but holds all together, as many things as it can count. Science is a basket, not a religion, he said. A cat as big as a cat. The moon, the size of the moon. Science is the same as poetry, only it uses the wrong words. I quite like a cat as big as a cat. That's empirically true.
Well, yeah, but it's not an SI unit of measurement, is it? A cat as big as a cat.
Should be. This room is about 12 cats wide.
So, I don't know what cat you've got.
Cats.
About 20
Quite a big
cats.
cat.
So, okay, bearing in mind what he's literally saying is a cat is as big as a cat.
That's just like, come on.
Yeah,
How can you not?
how do we feel about accepting or rejecting that particular worldview? And also that science is the same as poetry, but science uses the wrong words. More rejecting. Some of these people think that, I don't know, a cat is as big as a dog or something. Right, so it's more...
Well, it could be if it's a small dog.
It's more down... That's a poet. To be fair, though, it was more around here, I think. So that was Robert Kelly, was that?
That was Robert Kelly.
Okay.
Science.
But it's not...
But poets also... Okay,
it wasn't really a good example, though, was it?
Okay, I'll give you a better one. So poets are often commissioned. They go in residence at places, often in scientific institutes. Richard Brautigan, a famous American poet, was in residence at the California Institute of Technology at Caltech. So he was in residence there for 6 months and challenged to write some poetry about what he found. So this is what he wrote after 6 months in residence at Caltech. This is a great poem, Sam. You'll love this one.
Okay.
I don't care how goddamn smart these guys are. I'm bored. It's been raining like hell all day long, and there's nothing to do. Science.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So
6 months work. £20,000 commission.
6 months of work.
And if anybody wants a poet in residence at their institute, I am available.
Okay, so how do we feel about that? Imagine you've spent the summer of 1967 at Caltech, and that's what you come up with. Do we accept?
Oh no!
Yeah,
I've divided the room.
You've very much divided the room, but it's more reject than accept, though. So it's going to be about here, I think. And that was Brautigan.
Brautigan, best poem I think that's ever been written.
So Dan does keep trying to tell me that he wants to be the poet in residence at my university, and I think I know why now. If that's all that you write in 6 months,
I'll write you a haiku.
It's pretty poor.
17 syllables, a couple of £1,000. We can do that. That's fine.
Right. So Dan's given, in my opinion, some quite poor examples of poets attempting to write about science and the worldview that science presents. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you a poem by a scientist that does capture the worldview and is a beautiful poem by the Czech immunologist Miroslav Holob.
Wait, you mean the Czech poet Miroslav Holob? 22 collections of poetry he published? He's a poet.
He has 297 works of published work in immunology.
All right, we'll make him a scientist.
To be fair, he is also a poet laureate of Czech Republic because he didn't have enough to do with his life. Right. So this is by Miroslav Holob, the famous immunologist who did poetry in his spare time, and it's called Brief Reflection on Accuracy. Fish always accurately know where to move and when. And likewise, birds have an accurate built-in time sense and orientation. Humanity, however, lacking such instincts, resorts to scientific research. Its nature is illustrated by the following occurrence. A certain soldier had to fire a cannon at 6 o'clock sharp every evening. Being a soldier, he did so. When his accuracy was investigated, he explained, I go by the absolute accurate chronometer in the window of the clockmaker down in the city. Every day at 17:45, I set my watch by it and climb the hill where my cannon stands ready. At 17:59 precisely, I step up to the cannon, and at 18 hours sharp, I fire. And it was clear that this method of firing was absolutely accurate. All that was left was to check the chronometer. So the clockmaker down in the city was questioned about his instrument's accuracy. Oh, said the clockmaker, this is one of the most accurate instruments ever. Just imagine, for many years now, a cannon has been fired at 6 o'clock sharp. And every day I look at this chronometer and it always shows exactly 6. Chronometers tick and cannons boom. That's a pretty
It's a good,
poem.
yeah, it's a good poem. Yeah,
Part-time
very
poet.
good.
That's how good you can do part-time. So how do you feel about that in terms of the worldview that represents?
Oh,
Except-
overwhelmingly.
Yeah,
accept.
come on. It's mainly... What?
Yeah, for me, it seems like it's a poem about the danger of assumptions in science. Good.
Okay.
We'll be checking your work later.
But it is
Yeah,
more here,
pretty much
isn't it, I think?
overwhelmingly accept, yeah.
Okay, so that's...
Okay. I've been monitoring the Twitter feed, Sam. There's so much disagreement at the front row.
There's a lot of rage at the front down here for that poem.
So if you want to make your thoughts known, do tweet us. That's the official method of getting your comments into the show. I was going to read a quick poem from one of our, somebody we've had submitted, and I've stopped the search. That's okay. I'll move on to the next poem. So look, yes, you're right. Look, scientists can obviously absolutely describe the world, make you use poetry to do so. But I think poets can do this as well. And as poets have gone through the ages and developed their understanding, I suppose, of science, I think poets have started to use the language of science much more to give more accuracy into their poetry. I think Ted Hughes is a really famous example of this. Obviously very famous for his poetry about nature, but with a kind of scientific understanding, I suppose. So this is Hawk Roosting by Ted Hughes from 1960. I sit in the top of the wood, my eyes closed, inaction, no falsifying dream between my hooked head and hooked feet, or I sleep, rehearse perfect kills and eat. The convenience of the high trees, the air's buoyancy and the sun's ray are of advantage to me, and the earth's face upward for my inspection. My feet are locked upon rough bark. It took the whole of creation to produce my foot, my each feather. Now I hold creation in my foot, or fly up and revolve it all slowly. I kill where I please, because it is all mine. There is no sophistry in my body. My manners are tearing off heads, the allotment of death. For the one path of my flight is direct, through the bones of the living. No arguments assert my right. The sun is behind me. Nothing has changed since I began. My eye has permitted no change. I am going to keep things like this. Yeah. Smashing it, Ted Hughes. Like, that's such a beautiful description from the perspective of a hawk. And I think it's not, if not entirely, citations, references to scientific things, but I think it's an incredibly accurate description. And I guess this is what science does, but that is so much more beautiful than the way science could describe that situation, I think.
Okay, so how do we accept or reject? Is that a good description of what a hawk is like? The worldview that's presented in that particular poem.
Yeah. There's just so much rejection at the front here. Okay, but
You mean one, Sam? One reject at the front.
I think it's I'd say a little bit lower, but maybe here.
Okay,
Would you
yeah,
say?
I'll take that. That's
Okay.
good. Yeah.
So, in direct response to that, the British scientist and poet David Morley, is an ecologist, wrote this poem in 2002 called "Hawk Roosting Revisited."
Oh, come on! This is plagiarism again, Sam. Like stealing Ted Hughes' work.
He's inspired by it
Okay.
and cites it in his work.
Okay, we'll give you that.
Predation strategies rehearsed, i.e. activity diurnal, predatory, rapid eye movement when dormant. Hierarchical niche structure, theoretically, habitat when inactive, forest canopy. Predation strategies rehearsed, i.e. 100% attentive to prey stimuli, proactive at a feeding opportunity, rapid eye movement when dormant. Function of cognition, prey quality. Perceptual limitations during inactivity, predation strategies rehearsed, i.e. moves over identical zone in territory, male, dominant sexually, rapid eye movement when dormant. Highly pressured, environmentally. Future absence from food web, probably. Predation strategies rehearsed, i.e. rapid eye movement when dormant. It's interesting to say that because that poem is based on lab notes that David Morley took when he was out in the field. I should point out as well that David Morley, who wrote this poem about hawk roosting revisited, won the Ted Hughes Award for Poetry, something that Ted Hughes has never won.
I think you're going to get this on a technicality, Sam, let's be honest.
So I think we can safely say that David Morley is the better poet because of the awards that he won in the process. So how do we feel about the worldview that was presented by David Morley in that poem? Bear in mind, keep in consideration that which was presented by Ted Hughes as well. Ooh, less clear. Quite a few except there, but a lot of minor, probably more minor revisions down there. Okay, so around here, I think. That is David Morley, who might have to return his Ted Hughes Prize. Have you got a poem from the audience you want to read out?
I do,
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's one of our organisers, in fact. Yes, she is. So I really enjoyed this haiku written by Amy. This is excellent. I'm going to read the whole Twitter thread because it's brilliant. I hope it's a haiku, so 17 syllables, that classic form of Japanese poetry, often translated into 17 syllables when it's rendered into English. I hope nobody here reviews this tweet of mine. How embarrassing. What's great is then there were responses from a few different scientists. The concern with social appearance is too regionally British. Can the author revise and resubmit? Excellent. Then I'm not convinced by the author's haiku-based methodology. Please revise. Amy's response was amazing. Revise and submit. Again, they clamoured as I realised my poems add little to the literature. Can we have a round of applause for Amy? That's actually really brilliant. Amazing.
I want to add a tweet that we've got, and this is a really important tweet actually that we've got from Anna saying some great poems being read, but the selection is overwhelmingly male so far. I think that is a really good point. Thank you for raising that and for cutting us by about 2 minutes when we're about to introduce some females into the mix here. But it's an important question and something that when we were developing this piece, we needed to take into consideration because unfortunately, in science and in poetry as well, up until fairly recently, really, given historical precedence, it has been dominated by males, which is obviously completely unfair. And there are some beautiful examples of poetry that have been written about science by incredible female poets. I've got one here. I thought it's quite long, but I'd like to read it all. And we could split it in two, maybe?
Is it the Adrian Rich?
It's the Adrian Rich one, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is by Adrian Rich, and it's called Planetarium. And this addresses really the whole issue, in my opinion, of gender bias as well. So it has kind of an epilogue as well. Thinking of Caroline Herschel, 1750 to 1848, astronomer, sister of Williams, and others. A woman in the shape of a monster in the shape of a woman. The skies are full of them. A woman in the snow among the clocks and instruments, or measuring the ground with poles. In her 98 years to discover 8 comets. She whom the moon ruled like us, levitating into the night sky, riding the polished lenses, galaxies of women, there doing penance for impetuousness, ribs chilled in those spaces of the mind, an eye, virile, precise, and absolutely certain, from the mad webs of Uransborg encountering the nova. Every impulse of light exploding from the core as life flies out of us, Tycho whispering at last. Let me not seem to have lived in vain. What we see, and seeing is changing. The lights that shrivel a mountain and leaves a man alive. Heartbeat of the pulsar, heart sweating through my body, the radio impulse pouring in from Taurus. I am bombarded, yet I stand. I have been standing all my life in the direct path of a battery of signals, the most accurately transmitted, most untranslatable language in the universe. I am a galactic cloud so deep, so involuted that a light wave could take 15 years to travel through me, and has taken. I am an instrument in the shape of a woman, trying to translate pulsations into images for the relief of the body and the reconstruction of the mind. So how do we feel about that?
Amazing.
The worldview that that represents. Okay, cheered up a bit. Okay, we've gone to minor revisions at the front, right. So that is overwhelmingly strong, almost as you accept. I'm glad to see that you accept Adrian Rich almost as much as the audience in this room, which is quite nice. I'm going to pop her there.
Yeah, I feel it's time you've kind of stolen. I was doing the poems from the proper poets, not the part-timers.
Okay, so I apologise.
So it's fine. No, I wasn't going to do this poem, but I've actually decided I will now because it's called "The Horrid Voice of Science," and that's what I think you've got. It's called The Horrid Voice of Science. It's by Vajel Lindsay, American poet from 1919. I was coming around to your side, especially after that beautiful poem. I think poets can use scientific language to express beauty, but I think it does the... Actually, no. This is The Horrid Voice of Science. There's machinery in the butterfly. There's a mainspring to the bee. There's hydraulics to a daisy and contraptions to a tree. If we could see the birdie that makes the chirping sound with X-ray scientific eyes, we could see the wheels go round. And I hope all men who think like this will soon lie underground. Boom.
Whoa!
Yeah. Whoa. Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, it does feel quite harsh. All scientists should die.
Yeah.
So much for the subtlety of poetry.
So yeah, can we please see what people's opinions on all scientists? Actually, all male scientists should die. That's what that poem just said. Who thinks that all scientists should die? I'm confused. We're confused. Confused at the front.
Oh, only a couple minor revisions. A couple of accepts.
There's a few sociopaths here. I'm just keeping an eye on them so they don't follow me out of the auditorium. So that's mainly reject, thankfully. Who was that wrote that?
Oh, that was Lindsay.
Can you spell that? Because it's
Lindsay.
Lindsay.
Vajel, V-A-C-J-A.
I'm so confusing myself, right?
Okay. That's a poet, Sam. Yes. Okay,
fine.
You're welcome to claim it as a scientist's point of view.
Okay.
That's fine.
The thing is, though, in my opinion, the difference between me and Dan, the difference between scientists and poets, is that scientists are actually quite nice creatures, and poets, on the other hand, are vile. And he read that poem, and I'd found a poem for you that was quite nice. And this is by Simon Armitage. And Simon Armitage, what we're talking about today is really, the relationship between science and poetry, and how science and poetry have similarities maybe, how they present similar or different worldviews. But what really interests me is the interdisciplinarity of science and poetry, and how maybe the two of them can be used together to create something that's not necessarily science or the science of poetry, and not the poetry of science, but something completely new. And Simon Armitage, working with scientists at the Grantham Institute in the University of Sheffield, wrote a poem called In Praise of Air. I'm not going to read that poem now, but he wrote this poem called In Praise of Air. And rather than just writing this poem, they wrote it on a piece of paper and then stuck it to the building of the Grantham Institute. So it's the size of a building. But rather than just being a piece of paper, they also infused it with titanium dioxide. And titanium dioxide, I'm sure people know, removes nitrogen dioxide from the atmosphere via photocatalytic reaction. So this poster, which is talking about In Praise of Air, also removes enough pollution of about 20 cars or one bus as it goes past every day. And I think that's just a beautiful example of how we can use interdisciplinarity to push the boundaries of different disciplines and to create something new and unique. So that's why I wanted to choose Simon Armitage.
That felt like some scientific waffle.
Okay, okay. And this is a nice poem to you.
Oh, thank you.
And it's called I Am Very Bothered by Simon Armitage. I am very bothered when I think of the bad things I have done in my life, not least that time in the chemistry lab, when I held a pair of scissors by the blades and played the handles in the naked lilac flame of the Bunsen burner, then called your name and handed them over. Oh, the unrivaled stench of branded skin as you slipped your thumb and middle finger in, then couldn't shake off the two burning rings, marked, the doctor said, for eternity. Don't believe me, please, if I say that this was just my buttered-fingered way at 13 of asking you if you would marry me.
Yeah, and I'm really close to it.
So how is this a sensible proposal mechanism? Do we think? Do we accept or reject that particular worldview? Please hold it.
Major revisions. I like the sentiment, but not the practical.
Yeah, so major revisions on that one. Okay, so Armitage requires major revisions. He's a poet as well. Armitage, okay. Did you have any other tweets from the audience?
Oh, let me have a quick look. Some just compliments, which is lovely. Thank you. I think so far, yeah, just really nice stuff. People submitting some poems, which is brilliant. Do keep those coming. Should all scientists die? Asks Digital Science in response to the Lindsay piece. I like this. This is a nice metaphor. This session feels like a rainy afternoon, which I'm going to interpret with my poetic brain as a positive compliment on the session, which is excellent. I was going to read another quick piece by Ruth Pardell, the great-granddaughter, I want to say, of Charles Darwin, whose grandfather also wrote Erasmus Darwin. So there's a beautiful link there between in this scientific family of using poetry. Ruth Pardell was very much somebody who I'm coming back around to this idea of actually poets can use the language of science to express beauty. They take that truth and express it in a poetic way. And this is from The Mara Crossing by Ruth Pardell. And you can see where her sort of use of science, it's a very long piece, but I'll read a couple of extracts from it where she particularly picks out bits of science. You go because you have magnetite in your brain, thorax, tips of your teeth. Because there's food over the hill and there'll be gold, or more likely, bauxite inside the hill. You go because your mother is dying and only you can bring her the apples. You go because you need to work. You go because the astrologers say so, because the sea is calling and your best friend bought a motorbike in America last year. You go because the streets are paved with gold and your father went when he was your age. You go because you have 17 children and the Lord will provide. Because your 16 brothers have parceled up the land and there's none left for you. You go because the waters are rising, an ice sheet is melting, the rivers are dry. There are no more fish in the sea. You go because God has given you a sign. You had a dream. The potatoes are blighted because it's too hot, too cold, and you are on a quest for knowledge. And the knowledge is always beyond. You go because it's destiny. Because Pharaoh won't let you light candles on Friday at sundown. Skip to the nice bit. You pause halfway to stoke up on omega-3 and horseshoe crabs. You go for phosphorus, myrtle berries, salt. You go for oil and pepper. It was your father's dying wish. You go from pole to pole, you go because you can, you mate and sleep on the wing. Because you need a place to shed your skin in safety. You go with 1,000 questions, but you were growing up, growing old, moving on, saying goodbye to the might have beens. You go because you hope. So you can see absolutely taking that language of science, mixing it up with this beautiful, raw human emotion as well. And I think this is actually where poets have gone with science. They have taken that language and adapted it and made something beautiful of it. So should we do one review of that, the Ruth Pardell piece?
Okay, so how do you feel about the worldview that particular poem represents? Oh, look at that. Yeah, that is, okay, right, that's me.
We're coming to an agreement, Sam. This is wonderful.
Ruth Pardell is about there, isn't it? Okay. And I think there's an interesting conversation arising in Twitter sphere at the moment talking about this, where someone said, I'll just keep it anonymous for now, but if we peer review poetry, are we reviewing validity, philosophy, soundness, or literary quality? And that's a really good question, to which someone's responded, that's the problem with binary choices. We need space for full reports on the poems. But actually, that raises some quite interesting topics of conversation for this conference in general, in terms of peer review. You know, having major, minor, accept, reject, does that actually represent the full gamut that's necessary to do a serious peer review and to do something that's beneficial to the reader, the creator, and the peer reviewer themselves? So we're gonna finish with a couple of poems, but we're not gonna peer review them because it would be unfair to subject such works of art to binary response mechanisms.
Because we wrote them.
So, yeah.
One quick tweet, I like this. Poetry is expressing observations in a novel way. Science is poetry. Which seems to be very nicely onto my piece. After Sam's wonderful piece by Simon Armitage and Ruth Pardell taking the language of science, I've done the same myself. I do. I love science. I think it's an incredible way of looking at the world. And I think what poetry can do is take those findings and hopefully adapt them to something beautiful. So I want to do a love poem, if that's okay. poem about love, that traditional form, traditional subject for poetry, a poem about love. Sorry, I said love, didn't I? I meant a poem about mathematics. Get those mixed up. Goes like this. I love the curvature of your wave form, the way you diverge from the norm. I want to bring you to boiling point because too hot is not too warm. And when we touch, it's an electric storm and you're the lightning conductor. To my heightening thunder sound, you're the earth to my live wire, you keep me on the ground. If you were described by numbers, they would all be primes. But like Heisenberg, you're uncertain of where we are sometimes. So this verse is in a language that you can understand, bringing maths and poetry together in double helix strands. Because we've been carbon dating for a while, and sure, I'd made you smile, and statistically speaking, I'd make you laugh sooner or later. So the line on my mental graph paper that represented how I felt about you had an upward trajectory. Marking X's against the X-axis, I plot points and Y. Well, because X marks the spot where two lines intersect, connect in a future perfect tense, tell a story predicted by the focus of the locus. But this isn't magic, it's not hocus pocus, because you have no need for the supernatural, whereas I'm odd. I'm not always logical, and sometimes even my numbers are irrational. But you, well, you are the right angle for me, a cute reality to my obtuse literacy, not an abstract. And you pivot on moments like these. Affected by Brownian motion, we dance like particles. And I have this notion that I'm the definite article to your theoretical hypothesis, the words to your mathematics. For this is my medium of transmission. And I'm no paranormal magician. There are rules in writing too, creating literary fission through rhyme addition, division of lines to ease transition, multiplying meaning by verb position, subtraction of words made more powerful by omission. No, it's not a precise science, but there is a method to it. For example, electrons flow between two polar points. I am the north and you the south. We can't help but be attracted, and we reacted like water and phosphorus to form a compound substance, because you plus me equals us. And chemistry is undeniable, like electromagnetism or gravity. And though there are some sparks of volatility, ours is not a weak but a strong nuclear force. And in all probability, this is how we'll always be, because when we deviate, it's anything but standard, a sign that we're meant to be physical with our biology. And maybe I'm going off on a tangent here. Yeah, sign cause tan? Yeah. Maybe I'm going off on a tangent here, but pressed together, our contact force is not normal. Cosmic strings vibrate in harmonious commotion, and when we oscillate in our simple harmonic motion, I think that maybe one day we'll propagate, but that's in the future. So now, fourth dimension. I don't want to upset the equilibrium, I don't want to cause any tension, because our equation is balanced. You're the constant variable in my life, the quantity for which I did not factor. You keep me powered, you turn me on, you are my chain reactor, the dark matter I do not fully understand. The bright colours on my spectral band, you are pure mathematics. But applied together, we are poetry in motion. Great. Woo!
And that amazing poem from Dan is we're not asking you to rate them, but yeah, all accept, is available in Dan's book, which Applied Mathematics, which will be available for sale in the tea and coffee area. It looks a lot like a maths textbook, so you might be disappointed or not, depending on your particular persuasion, but it is definitely worth checking out. So I'd like to, I guess, respond to that. And I think that, you know, we're looking at science and poetry, but for me, I don't like those labels of people being a scientist or people being a poet. You know, I'm a scientist, I'm a poet, but I actually think that people aren't scientists, people aren't poets, people aren't artists, people aren't musicians. People are just people that actually have infinite potential, and that by us placing them in pigeonholes, we're removing some of that potential from them. So I'm a scientist, and scientists like to dream, but I'm also a poet, and poets like to think. And I was thinking, and I was dreaming about what would happen if my favourite artist of all time had been a scientist instead. If Bowie were a scientist, he'd have colonised the moon and built an elevator that would have us there by noon. If Bowie were a scientist, we'd all have free energy. With Tesla as his guru, we'd no longer be at sea. If Bowie were a scientist, he'd have cloned more than a sheep. There'd be unicorns and dragons, and we'd count them in our sleep. If Bowie were a scientist, there'd be no more starvation. he'd have grown some freakish crops, enough to feed each nation. If Bowie were a scientist, he'd have disarmed every gun. The peacefuls would have won the war. We could concentrate on fun. If Bowie were a scientist, you'd have your hoverboard. There'd be no more feeling low with our pacifist warlord. If Bowie were a scientist, there'd be no global warming. The polar ice caps would return. A new age would be dawning. If Bowie were a scientist, you can bet there'd be time travel. We could use it to be heroes. Our bad deeds we could unravel. If Bowie were a scientist, I bet he'd have the answer. Because if Bowie were a scientist, he'd have found the cure for cancer. Thank you.
So before we draw some conclusions from the data, very nice tweet, peer review, the process, too slow. How can we improve the flow? Looking forward to inspiration to enhance its role and reduce frustration.
Oh,
nice.
Wow, that's really good.
And I'll take that as an entry for Spot on Poetry. Lovely. Okay, so I'm going to draw a couple of conclusions from the data we've gathered so far.
Can I draw my conclusions first? I think that looking at that, as someone beautifully interpreted, it is difficult to have what we're actually peer reviewing here, and maybe a binary response or a four-way response is too limiting. But I think that is something that we can apply beyond poetry and actually into science itself. And it'll be really interesting to hear people's thoughts the rest of the day in terms of the future of peer review.
So I'm seeing a big sort of cluster around here. It's kind of an interesting point here, and then I think there's some sort of curve, which is really interesting. And I think that, it's a winky face. Okay, good.
Okay, right.
That's kind of what I'm drawing from this session this morning.
So you've drawn a winky face.
Yeah.
Okay, which
Yeah.
is thanks for keeping it serious.
You're welcome.
So yeah, thank you very much. That's been peer review poetry.
Should we do our
Oh
final
yeah,
piece?
actually
We have
yeah.
our final piece?
So we've kind of, as you've seen, we've kind of come together, thinking that science and poetry have got a lot to offer one another, and we do like each other really, and we do think that science and poetry have got a lot to offer one another, and so we'd just like to share this final piece with you by Albert Goldbach called "The Sciences Sing a Lullaby." Physics says, go to sleep. Of course you're tired. Every atom in you has been dancing the shimmy in silver shoes, non-stop from mitosis to now. Quit tapping your feet. They'll dance inside themselves without you. Go to sleep. Geology says, it will be all right. Slow inch by inch, England is giving itself to the ocean. Go to sleep. Let darkness lap at your sides. Give darkness an inch. You aren't alone. All of the continents used to be one body. You aren't alone. Go to sleep. Astronomy says the sun will rise tomorrow. Zoology says on rainbow fish and live gazelle. Psychology says, but first it has to be night. So biology says the body clocks are stopped all over town. And history says, here are the blankets, layer on layer, down and down. Thank you very much. Thank you.